Hampshire originally, but has been based in the northeast for many a year, around about 20 years. He's 57 and he's just had his first book published. Now, what's interesting is that Cameron is dyslexic and also waiting on an autism diagnosis as well, so that's quite late in life, but has achieved loads with this book. So we chatted first of all about his life starting off in the Army Reserves.
I had two separate experiences with the Army. I did 8 years in the Royal Army Medical Corps. I left for 10 years and then retrained as a nurse. And then I joined the reserves. I didn't realise how much I missed it till I left, and thoroughly enjoyed what I was doing. And I was absolutely privileged to have some fantastic experiences. As a nurse, I worked in Africa, America, and Afghanistan.
God, I mean, obviously, that's an incredible thing to do. But likewise, I've chatted to a lot of people that have been in theatres of war and in places like that. And it can obviously lead to difficulties in life when you're coming back to a civvy life. Was it very tough to do that, to come back to civvy life?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, we all respond to our strengths and weaknesses. I did have a few problems adjusting. The rules of society expect you to behave in a perfectly normal manner, and it sort of comes to a complete crunch and absurd. And that was a problem, yes. Which is why it caused me to write the book in actual fact, because as an outlet, I just put down a load of random thoughts down on paper to try and not absorb the poison of what we'd experienced.
That's so interesting, because, and thank you for being very honest about that as well, Karen, because, I've chatted to lots of soldiers from the northeast. We have a very sort of rich history of people from the northeast going and serving, and a lot of discussion around PTSD and that strange absurdity of going from that extreme pressured situation to then literally, bobbing into Tesco to buy a meal deal. How do you deal with that? It's very, very difficult. And the idea that creativity was an outlet is fantastic. Did you feel as soon as you started being creative and writing that was an outlet? How did that feel for you?
Well, it was brilliant. I'd actually done it once before, because obviously you can tell by the accent I'm not a local, but I have been living up here for well over 20 years. What started it was back in 1988, believe it or not, Donington Monsters of Rock, and I was involved in a major incident there with crowd where a number of people lost their lives. I was left resuscitating 45 minutes with one person. I then moved down from Derbyshire. I moved down to Woking to work on the railways, and I found myself in a situation where I couldn't cope with it, and I wrote down a really dark and horrible poem. Whenever I've had those sort of experiences, I found that worked incredibly for me. It got rid of all the, if you want to use the word mental poison, it got rid of all that and channeled it onto the paper, and so I didn't absorb it. So every time I've had some extreme weird experiences, that's what I've done. So it's been a natural progression. Basically, there wasn't enough there or continuity there to write it as a straightforward biography. So what I did was I changed the context of the story. So the experiences were still there, and I changed them and put them into a format that was easily appreciated by somebody having a look at it.
Yeah, and people love crime novels. They love a mystery, they love a crime novel, but they also love a good character. So tell us about the Cicero file, because I think is the lead investigator a woman, Pat, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. I came across these in the army, these two lovely ladies. So they are really based on real people. However, they weren't police officers. They were just people I knew from the medical side of stuff. And I've never seen them since I did my army training back in 1990. So I basically formed characters around those two characters, because they were very tight friends, and they're extremely lovely people and very forgiving to me.
That's interesting, because I think a lot of creatives do that. They look in life and they observe, and then that's what they do. They create characters out of what they observe. And essentially it starts with a biker on, is it the Redgeoff Bridge? And there's some suspicion around his death. It's suspicious, and so the book unravels what's happened and his past, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, once again, that was based. although it wasn't the Reggie Bird, I actually was involved in a motorcycle accident on the A19. So I used that experience. Obviously, I was aware of the dangers of the time, certainly along that area. So as a mechanism of it to introduce the character, he was killed.
So it's a pretty dramatic start, and then, of course, it'll all become clear as the book goes on with these brilliant characters. And have you found it a cathartic experience writing the Cicero file? Has it been a good experience writing it?
Absolutely. To couple it into one of the things is I'm also dyslexic. So for me to read a book for leisure, it's an extremely hard thing to do. In fact, it's exhausting for me to read books. So it's not something I do on a regular basis. That being said, I wrote the book in 2017. I was completely stunned when a publisher came back and said, yeah, this is commercial.
You must have felt, I mean, given that you've had your struggles with your dyslexia, and we're going to chat about you're waiting for your assessment for autism as well, but that's very, very inspirational for other people that might have dyslexia, that, you know what, you can go on and write a book.
I really hope so. I really do. I mean, I've seen lots of people on chat shows and what have you say, how do we write books? Well, the simple answer is just put pen to paper.
Yeah. Just go for it.
Put down your ideas. There was no format. I learned from television there needed to be some kind of flow, and the story I had didn't flow, so that's why I made it a crime novel where the bits and pieces could be done as a form of interview with various characters that impacted on the victim's life.
Yeah, and isn't it amazing getting a publisher as well? So not self-publishing, to actually get that is phenomenal, because it's not easy at all. There's just loads of rejection, isn't there, when you're trying to write a book? 10:27. That's Cameron Herwood. We'll hear more from Cameron in 2 ticks, and also going to give you clue number 2 on the blockbuster banger. In the meantime, this is Ed Sheeran and Bad Habits.
Every time you come around, you know I can't say no. Every time the sun...
Room.
They always kept saying, remember, you're not a star. I said, well, whatever I am, I'm the blonde.
Love that. I'm not a star.
They always kept saying, remember, you're not a star.
Calling out your name. Whoa. Guilty of loving. Guilty of love. Guilty of loving.
And so when I went back and did the assessments, I had the support of the Dean of the University of Wolverhampton at the time, and they suggested I get tested for dyslexia. And wow, there it is. I hit bang on all the triggers for it.
Do you know, with the autism as well, I've chatted, again, over the years doing this job, lots and lots of people who are on the spectrum. I've learned a lot about the spectrum, you know, that it is a circle and it's not a line. And I've learned about neurodiversity and about, rather than awareness, it's acceptance and understanding the good things that can come from neurodiversity as opposed to, you know, the negatives. There are also an enormous amount of positivity to neurodiversity. You know, you might not have written this book if you weren't in some way neurodiverse. You never know. But do you think it would have been easier if you'd got a diagnosis for other people's understanding of you as a person?
Absolutely. And also with me understanding me. I mean, I've had a terrible time in the workplace, partly because of the army silly things that she drew on earlier on, quite correctly. But also, sometimes I'm not behaving in a manner that most people would find acceptable in a normal situation. Now, it doesn't mean to say I'll be doing anything inappropriate or, you know, wrong. It's just I'm not behaving as they would expect me to behave.
Yeah, so maybe impulsive or saying things that other people might find shocking, that sort of thing.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. And yet, that's a lot of that's down to neurodiversity. I think it's just an understanding thing, isn't it?
It is, and then basically, I've got a nephew who's diagnosed with severe autism. My brother was also diagnosed with autism, and that sort of made me take a step back and think, hang about, something's, you know. And then I was talking to a friend who's an art therapist, and he said, look, you need to get yourself tested. So at the moment, I registered back in February. Obviously, I'm on the waiting list as we speak.
Do you think if you do get a proper diagnosis, it'll help you, Cameron?
It will do in one way, because it'll explain the way I do things and the way I am.
Yeah.
And sometimes, once you can understand why you're having problems interacting with other people, you may not be able to change that, but at least you can come to terms with how you present yourself and try and train yourself to be more aware of social norms that aren't being met.
Really interesting. And in terms of your writing, Cameron, are you going to, presumably the fact that you've had success with this one, have you got other books in the pipeline?
I've actually completed the sequel, because one thing I hadn't realised till afterward, once I'd got the flags up 2 years ago from the publishing company, it really inspired me to go on before. I'd had a sequel, which I'd written 2 chapters about. I basically just scrapped those 2 chapters, rewrote them, produced my sequel, the Caesar file. That's going through the editing process as we speak. The 3rd book, writing the final chapter now, and then I've got a 4th book which I've already got in my mind forming, again based on various different aspects and experiences in my life.
That is fantastic. And I think for people listening who may be neurodiverse, might have neurodiverse people in their family, people that may well have dyslexia, that's a pretty positive role model to be able to do those things, and actually that you can do them well. Don't be put off, really.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it totally surprised me. As I say, I do occasionally read books. I find the motion of travel, so obviously not while I'm driving the car, but when I'm on a train or flying in an aeroplane, I find the motion of the vehicle settles my mind enough to actually read. So that's the only time I tend actually to read books.
Do you know what, Cameron? It's been an absolute joy chatting to you. Thank you very, very much for coming on the show. People can find the Cicero file online and let us know when your next lot come out, won't you?
Honestly, I will be glad to. It's a privilege talking to you. Thank you very much.
Nice, Cameron, to chat to you. And don't forget, of course, this is absolutely your radio station. So if you've got a story, something you'd like to talk to us about, this is